Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours 2.0. We are still experimenting with this, but we're getting better at it. It's good to see you here. If you see a little link down below, you can click on that and you'll end up in Zoom. And from there, you can click on that and end up in Mukana. And that's where you become a producer for the show. This show is about you. It's about how, but basically what you want to learn. We don't really have an agenda beyond answering questions, at least in the first hour. So ask the questions, ask a lot of them. The best time to ask is right before the show so that we see them get voted up. We spend a little more time on the top of the hour than the bottom of the hour. So just ask those questions and dig into what you want to learn about media and virtual production. You can also vote on those questions, so that's also very, very important. And then if you think that you can actually answer the questions, just come in a little early. You need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to be part of the panel when we do mic checks. You can come in a little early if you want to test your setup. So you can come in as early as 6 o'clock, and if you want to, we're talking about all kinds of stuff today. We're talking about running HDMI through the wall, but sometimes we also were talking about, I think we talked a little bit about the recording orchestras. That might have been the pre-show, but we were talking a little bit about that as well. So there's a lot of, we range around in the morning, but the primary reason we're there is to check your system. First hour is general questions of anything you have around media or virtual production. Second hour is specifically something we want to play with. Now, this week, we're playing with the mechanics of how we do the show. So as you're watching it, you'll see us experiment. We're experimenting right now. And you'll see us experiment with how we're putting the show on YouTube or how we're streaming it. Our goal is to kind of take it to the next level. And we're spending a couple weeks in the restructure of that as we move forward. We're back to a regularly scheduled program next week. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow night, we'll have yet another WWDC wrap up where we're taking what we've seen. We had some ideas from only the keynotes when we did it on Monday, but on Thursday we're going to back up and we're going to have more people here from the panel as part of the conversation. That's one of the things we're experimenting with today. And we're going to just discuss what we saw and what came out in the developer sessions and what we think is actually important. So that's coming up on Thursday night. And a reminder to the educators that we have an education conversation on Saturdays from 8 to 10. And we're moving that to 9 to 10. So I have to change that. I think it's actually incorrect in the email that went out. 9 to 11 is when we're going to be doing the education hour. The main reason is the first hour kept on running into the second hour, and so we decided so that we'll end the first hour at 8:45, bring the educators in at 8:45, and then run through it. That's not recorded because we're doing some kind of harder lifting right now in there. So you'll have to be there for that. All right, Bill, you ready to ask that first question?
I think so. Good morning, Alex, and welcome everybody. Let's get to our first question. Tony Mobley in Newman, Georgia, says, "How to do a hybrid wedding? What's the hardware needed? Do you need to bring your own internet?" And he has a note: it's a low-budget wedding.
So for low budget, what I would say is number one is you do need internet and you need a wired connection. And sometimes that can be hard at a wedding venue. So a wired connection is really, really important. I'll be honest, the best way to do this really is to find a way to put the stream, the camera, at least at the beginning, somewhere they can see the ceremony. And so you want to get kind of the ceremony. If you can do multiple cameras, that's great. If you can't, you just want to get a good click as if someone was sitting maybe in the back or to the side of the crowd. And then you have to figure out where to put it. And the thing that does make a difference if you're doing hybrid for a wedding, I've done a couple of these, is that you want to have a place where people can walk and say hi. And the bride and groom should walk over and say hi to everybody, talk to folks, have a way for them to visualize the folks that are there. So the bride and groom treats the camera like they would a table. When they go on that little tour, they should go over and talk to everyone and probably spend a little extra time depending on how many people actually have their videos on and are ready to talk. So you'll need a speaker there for them to hear it and a mic, for them. It might be easier. You may find it easier even though it's a little staged, is to have the bride and groom use something like an SM58 that you're not going to hear everything that's there. Otherwise, you may have trouble, distinguishing on the other side what it actually sounds like. We've done it both with shotgun and SM58s, and the SM58s look a little wonky, but they sound a lot better. And especially if you have people coming from all over the world, it's really hard not to. You can also put it in a space that doesn't have as much. The one place we did have it work is have some small mics in front. We actually used a lav But what we did is we put them in a room where you could see people behind them, but they were pretty isolated from that process. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Stuart.
My first question would be, as you define hybrid, is that interactive, in which case you need something like Zoom, or is that just a from the wedding to other parties, which you could use a streaming? And so if you're streaming, you could do something like an Atem Mini Pro. And if you don't have internet at the venue, you could tether a phone. That's fairly low budget. But as Alex was talking about, if you want to do interactive, then you have all the sound problems of two-way duplex audio to deal with.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, actually did a wedding not too long ago and used the little Netgear router for the internet out from it. One thing we did think about doing is put up a logo beforehand, reminding people to mute their microphones at home so that they weren't coming back to us and interrupting the process, like interrupting the wedding itself. And we actually took the time to actually get the bride and groom to address everybody directly. So they came to the camera after the ceremony, were handed the mic that a reporter would normally use, and delivered a thank you to everyone for attending.
Mm-hmm. Is there one more? Next question.
Comes from Bad Herrenalb, Germany, and particularly from Fred Eric Eckert. And he asks, what hardware is needed to measure lip sync, and what hardware is needed to dial in said lip sync?
The best hardware out there to do this is called Matchbox. It's made by a company called Hitomi. That is the box that everybody in broadcast uses. So, that it's about a $10,000 box, but what it does is you get the feed in there. It's sending a signal that it knows from the source what it is, and then it comes out the other end and you can do it. Now, there's a lot of cheaper ways to do that. The cheapest way to do it is to record your stream on the far end and then take it into your editor, your NLE, and make a decision, like basically look at how far it's off. And then just correct it and then do it again. That's the cheapest way to do it. And a lot of times what you can do is literally take a slate and just walk up there and go whack, and then walk out and see where that impulse was versus where the slate actually touched itself, touched into it as the arm came down. So that is, one way that you can, that's the cheapest way to do it. A lot of us just dial it in, watch it and turn it in. A lot of our audio boards have delays, and then you have to decide whether you're delaying the output or the input. The output is if everything needs to be delayed a little bit, then you may make some fine adjustments on the input, on different inputs, especially if you have, for instance, a wireless, you may have different delays than your wired audio, or video. So if you're transporting, for instance, a wireless camera with audio, you're going to lose a frame or two, on the way through that process. And so those are some of the things to kind of think about. And since no one else is raising their hand, there's your answer. All right, next question.
Off to Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. And Ari says, when setting up a Zoom pinning farm to use NDI or HDMI capture devices, and if NDI, how many PCs, dual monitor, can be comfortably scraped? And his LAN is Gigabit.
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
So I've got some recent experience with this where we had to do a bunch of pre-records for a conference, and while we were building 6 Constellation racks to be able to do that, we had to use 4 setups in doing and PC based and using NDI and going into vMix. And we did 7 days straight of these recordings, so about 400 presentation pre-records. And my experience at the end of 7 days of 4 setups with NDI was, I don't want to use NDI. And so it was okay, and we did all right out of it. But at the end of the day, we had lots of frame drops, and then just weird sync issues that would happen, and it would just stop. Anyway, that's not the question. The question, going back to the question, so we did that same thing, but we did a combination of standard Zoom app and Zoom Rooms. And the advantage with doing Zoom Rooms is that you could get 3 display outputs, and you could scrape those. And that was okay. But as I said, we just ran into little weird bandwidth issues and stuff. So my answer is do it in hardware. And that's how I do it all now, is it all comes out in hardware and I capture it into an ATEM. And it just always works that way.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm doing 4 or 5 screens, and I do a scrape. I'll do HDMI out. But if you do NDI, very important to create a separate network from that, and then turn off all your wireless. That includes if the router has wireless, just turn it off. That way, it's not making any calls out wirelessly. Everything is going through a wire, and then of course each individual machine, put in static IP addresses, and then just turn off the DHCP on the router, so you have direct routes. It knows exactly where it's going to go to.
Next question.
A show friend Jonas Tuttel of Reutling in Germany is up next with, for remotely controlling equipment that has a web interface, has someone looked at Cloudflare Argo?
No. Sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to. You'll have to come back to us. You have stumped us. All right, next question.
Next question is Guy Cochran here on the panel from Seattle, Washington, and he says, any exciting updates on obvo, obv.io?
Since we have Grant here, let's ask him.
It's a little softball. Thanks.
Yeah, Guy's a master of it. It's got just the right amount of arc that it's just easy to catch. Go ahead, Grant.
So obvo is a product that Blue Malnick and I founded for getting particularly large events into Zoom, and so across multiple Zoom meetings. So it's a event dashboard system, and so we have a couple of hundred, just over 200 beta users at the moment that are running events, and so it's actually really weird that we've done all these. Previously, we were doing so many events and we were the only ones using it. And now I was just on a call, which is why my logo popped up just before. But, and it's just weird to hear people, we just ran an event with a couple hundred people and it all went great. We're like, oh, great. We didn't even know it was happening. Anyway, so at some point, we'd love to come on and show you all. But
when you guys are ready, we're ready to have you. Yeah, absolutely. Not
to some big sales pitch, but just that we're messing around with an event front end for getting people into Zoom, and then we handle all of the Zoom creation of the meetings and all of that happens automatically, and it's on our account, enterprise account. So
I kind of feel like Obvio is like part of the family because you guys met here in office hours and a lot of those things. So we would love to promote it. So just flat out, love to have you on for an hour to talk about it and show it off. So when you guys are ready, just have someone reach out, or you should reach out, or Blue can reach out. But we're happy to have you. Go ahead, Chris. Yeah,
Alex, I just want to point out that yes, as you mentioned, they met here and now people are using it. And where's your teleprompter software? I'm just asking.
My Telestrator software?
Your Telestrator software.
Waiting for a Swift developer willing to put about a weekend of work into it. Okay. All right. I keep on going, I'm just going to write it myself, but it's never going to happen. So I'm just looking for someone who's willing to play. Next question.
Gordon Lake is up next, Los Angeles, California. In a Blackmagic Camera, ATEM and Hyperdeck world, at what point do I need to add NDI to the mix? And will I need to make substantial investments in Birddog gear?
You don't have to put NDI in the mix, so you can, but there's not any have to. I think that once you've gone down that path, I would probably stick with it until Blackmagic moves to IP. Which once you've started to buy Blackmagic hardware, you're kind of in hardware until I wouldn't bother thinking about it until Blackmagic decides where it's going to go. My guess is Blackmagic's going to just go with 2110. So that there's going to be some point where that converts over, but the hardware will do what you need. Exactly what it can do today, which is pretty good for quite some time. Next question.
Comes from Richard Lavery in Belfast, Ireland. And he asked, what is a workflow for HDR video? What do we have to think about when trying to achieve HDR?
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so the first thing that you would want to do is be able to view HDR. Right now, the best solution that we have to share files, it's actually the iPad Pro. Right, so that's what I've been sharing files with. Now, I work on Resolve, so what I do is that I will make my 709 grade, and my last node, I managed, how could I put it? I managed all the color on my own. I don't let the software do it, just because we've had some issues. So on my last node, I'll decide if I'm outputting P3 or 709 or whatever it is. And once I do my 709, I'll change over to PQ, which is ST2084, and I'll change to P3 color space because our monitors can actually see P3, at least mine can, but nothing can see 2020 yet. Now, you might want to put your P3 within the body of Rec 2020, which is what Netflix and a lot of people are recommending, but it's still viewed just P3. So my first
And what's the difference? Can you define for people the difference between P3 and Rec 2020?
Oh, yeah. So P3 is larger than Rec 709 within the scope of what the human eye can actually see. Right? The standard that we've had for a very long time is actually Rec 709. Outside of that sits P3, which is what Apple has been using for a while and most professional monitors sit at. Outside of that is actually Rec 2020. Now, no monitor made right now can actually view 2020, which is why if you look at Ardings, they say, oh, it's showing 85% of Rec 2020. Right? So right now we don't have that yet. But we are getting closer to reproducing what the eye can actually see, which is why things are slowly starting to look more vivid and natural, the way that we experience life outside. So that would be my approach. First, get a monitor that you could actually view HDR. If it's a consumer TV, it's a little tricky. I know there's a question coming up about that. I would start there. If you are going to use the iPad, grade your 709, and my process is then I render P3 PQ and I send it to the iPad, and it triggers the HDR, right? Because I cannot do it in Sidecar right now, and that's a whole nother conversation with Apple. But that's been a great way for us to actually be able to view HDR.
And one of the APIs that's out there is being able to use the viewer for the iPad. So with some of the stuff that we saw with WWDC, we expect to see by the end of the summer, or I expect to see by the end of the summer, Resolve and probably Final Cut being able to see the see the iPad and be able to send that properly over.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So it does appear that that's available in some of the new APIs in the new OS. So that should be something that we should see coming. As far as acquisition, all you have to do is capture and log. So preferably raw, because that's going to give you the most data to work with. But log is what you're trying to capture in, and you really need to capture in at least 10-bit, if not 12-bit color. So because you need more steps, of gradation for the different color channels. So that's one of the things that you want to do is that you want to make sure that you have those. Of course, 10-bit gives you 10 instead of 256, which is what we get with 8-bit. 10-bit's going to give you 1024, and 12-bit's going to give you 4096. So you have a lot more gradation available, and as you stretch those brightnesses of each color channel up, you need those steps to create a nice smooth transition from one brightness to another. And at 8-bit, we'll just create big steps, which is what when we say big steps, what that looks like in your video is banding. So what you need is so that's why you need to have a higher bit rate. So a high bit rate with log, and what log does is, of course, it reduces that contrast and takes more advantage of it, and it has a very long knee. And so that you end up capturing a lot more data in that stream, so that when you stretch it back out, you have the data there. So those are the things. And log is very old. Like I was doing it, working in log versus linear, 20 years ago. So it's not new to the cameras. It's just new. It's newer to how a lot of us shoot stuff. So if you're going to go into HDR, you have to. You don't have to, but highly recommend that you're shooting in log, 10-bit or 12-bit. If we back into something like, I need a lot more time than my data provides, then I might back into a 4422 HQ. That will allow me to stretch it. That's like minimum quality, and then XQ is really where you want to go, because that'll give you the 12-bit. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Charles, you said you get a good substitute monitor is the iPad. How do you get the file from your office to, say, my iPad where I am? Is it just like, will it view through Frame.io? Will Frame.io show me all the HDR?
Good, Charles.
Yeah, so I actually use Frame.io, and I have everybody download it locally. And since it's triggered as HDR, like it's tagged as HDR and as in P3, it's going to trigger it. So it'll just get bright and you'll see what you need to see. Now, for those getting into HDR and grading, you'll need to rethink a little bit how you approach it, because at first everybody sees, oh, I have so much, room now, and they push everything, and then skins look completely unnatural. So you have to start to go outside, look at how things actually look in real life, and those specular highlights, which is what HDR is made for, it's essentially not skin, but reflections and water and candles and lights. And then you try to recreate life a little bit more accurately. And that's because we've been so limited in 709.
And we can do a whole, we will do a whole second hour when Charles has the time to hang out with us for an hour for that. But one of the things you're really talking about also pulling the highlights. This is where we get into, you've got, pulling the blacks, the highlights, and the gamma. And the gamma is where the skin sits, right, for the most part. And so what you don't want to do is necessarily grab onto the middle of that curve and pull it up. That's what makes the skin look crazy. But, being able to accentuate some of the highlights there. And that's where Resolve does a really good job of letting you pinpoint what you're actually grabbing onto. Have you used the color, the morphine tool very much, Charles?
Yeah, I have. It's if I'm fine tuning something like a color, like a gray is looking a little warm, like I'll try to grab that and I'll move it over. It's actually come in very handy. I'm very interested in what they're going to do with the AI that they've been pushing a little bit more. I think they're going to come after Color Lab.
Right.
So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas, is up next. And Rupert asked, the Elgato Stream Deck 5.0 app update was released yesterday. Any comments on any new features?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, the best feature about this is it's turning the whole Elgato into a soundboard and music board, and they're giving you the places to go get the music and the sound, all royalty free. So you could do all the little beeps and boops if your stream does that. The other thing is they opened up a store inside the Stream Deck, so you can get to the plugins faster. You can get different ideas. Like I learned how to do something with the lights I didn't know about with Stream Deck before, which is really great. So it's really opened up for a lot of creators.
Next question.
Gabriel Ung comes to us next from Malaysia and asks, in Office Hours 2.0, how are you able to put the Zoom gallery onto a custom off-gray background? Screen scraping an odd number of panelists causes a black space on both sides of the last line of panelists, which I would like to avoid. Thanks.
I have to admit, I'm not looking at how it's streamed, so we'll have to take a look at. We're still playing with it as far as how that's actually pictured into that process. So, we're scraping it by having a computer watch the show as the participant, and then we're just grabbing onto that screen and then putting it out. And so, overall, it's a higher resolution. I have to admit that I'm not actually looking at the overall stream at the moment, and so, but we're still fine tuning it to how this is actually going to work as we keep on moving forward. Go ahead, Jesse.
So, because you're recentering people and cropping them or enlarging them, I did notice, and I think what is being referred to is, I think it was Jeff that had the vinyl behind him. He was sitting so far off center that there was a black bar to the right of him. He was sort of over-centered to the point there was no frame.
Yeah, and I think that we may be probably overcorrecting this right now. I mean, my intention for the first hour especially is just full screens of everybody and not trying to center all of that stuff, and just have it be full screens and maybe just a little bit bigger. Whereas the second hour, we may play with it, but I think that we have to be kind of careful of how hard we push it. But again, today we're experimenting more, and we'll continue to screw it up for a couple more of these as we kind of figure it out. So there's still a lot of calculations that we're trying to make as far as figuring out the best way to do this. The goal is that what no one's ever done before is actually have 30 panelists that you can randomly access and gather and have a meaningful conversation and not have them have to be too conscious to it or thinking about it. And as we start to do this, we're starting to realize things like about half of our panel is not framed for a show. So it's worked until now. But we're going to have to start, we're probably going to have to start putting up forms that people, that our panelists need to match so that they all match the same framing. So that it makes it a little easier for us to cut from each person. So that there's lots of little things that we'll have to do from a design perspective as we go through it. But on the other side of this is the potential of producing a show that literally no one's ever seen before, where we're able to randomly jump from one person to another, have super sources, have graphics, have play out. Our goal is to then move it to HDR and immersive sound, and really take it to a whole nother level, both in quality. A lot of people come up with good ideas. They're like, okay, this is really cool, and we can all talk together, and they're weird. They're weird. Like they do weird things. And that's what almost every a lot of the not so much what Obvio is doing, because they're managing the Zoom access, but people who add all the graphics and stuff and put people in little bubbles and put them in weird places. And what happens is the general population looks at it and just goes, yeah, that's weird. And so what we want to do is get to a point where we can do something that is really aggressive as far as a conversation goes. But from a traditional background, if you're looking at it as a broadcaster, you go, wow, that's cool. And take it to 4K, do all these things that make it really, really high quality. And the only reason we can do this, by the way, is because the panelists are working so hard on their presentation. That everyone's working so hard at looking good. There's no reason to do this if we didn't have everyone working so hard at sounding good and looking good. That's part of why this works. Go ahead, Grant.
Hey, I was just going to say, Alex, that we've heard you talk for a year about all different sorts of things and these new ideas. We're working on this and we're working on this. I just wanted to give props that you are actually doing it. Like that you just gone, okay, now it's starting and now we're doing it and we're making it happen. Thank you, because we're all learning from it. I did just see an interview with Obama and one of the guys, and they did that stupid, 2 chairs in completely different locations, and they're trying to make it look like it's in the same location. And all I could think about was, you talking about put me in the middle of the conversation, not watching you guys have the conversation. And the weird thing is that they've got to bend themselves in half to try to make it look like they're looking at each other, when actually you could just give us the 2 shots of them looking directly into the camera, and that would connect better with us. And that's exactly what you're talking about with this panel, is us just feeling like we're right there in the middle of the conversation.
The funny thing is that what really solidified that for me was actually the Obama Oprah interview, where they did this thing where they created this artifice of the 2 of them being in the same room. So I've done events with Obama. so I've had the opportunity to do that straight on shot with him a couple times. And I felt like my low resolution Hangouts version of that, when he's talking to people, was more intimate and more interesting than what the Oprah interview was. She asked better questions in some cases, but not always. And that it was actually more intimate to watch him talk to you directly. And what we had is the first one we did with Obama in 2012 was a huge teleprompter, 70-inch teleprompter. Never carry that big of a glass into the White House again. That was a horrible idea. Anyway, but we had him in the Roosevelt room with this giant teleprompter, and he's looking straight into it, everyone's life size at least, and he's just talking to them, and able to have that conversation. And I felt that that was actually a better experience than what they're doing. And ours was expensive, it wasn't, but not as expensive as what they did. Definitely not as expensive as all this green screen and all this other stuff. And that's, old thinking. It's people in old media trying to do something new, but really still living in their old world, because we don't really want to be on the outside of that conversation, just as Grant said, and as I've talked about. It's like, see how he's still looking across, across the camera. That is old thinking, and the person that was probably the one that's most well known for the next generation of this is really Errol Morris, who started doing, and that's what I really got when I was asked by Salesforce to do a lot of Teratron work. And that's when I had to study Errol Morris's, Into the Void and Fog of War. And if you look at how he does those interviews, I find them to be so much more gripping than looking across. And the reason we looked across is because we didn't know how to do the other part. And we didn't want to. It was very traditional. But that looking across the camera is old. It's old. Like there's no reason to do that anymore. And the person that really knew how to do this was Mr. Rogers. We all grew up with someone who knew how to look right into the camera and talk to us as if we were right there. So we all grew up with the true innovator of that eye-to-eye contact with the viewer, and we're just able to now do it in a large scale. And it's actually easier to do from our house than it is to do in a studio. Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
Well, and again, it's the human factor. You're talking in a conversation, one person to one person. The technology and the style will change because that's what technology. That's what we have to sell something. So style will continue to change.
We have the opportunity now to put the audience right in the middle of it. We didn't have that before, and now we have the technology to do that. And so we have to continue to innovate and not stick with our old-fashioned thinking. Next question.
Comes to us from Richard Levray, and I'm probably mispronouncing your name. Sorry, here in the panel from Belfast, Ireland. If you are starting from scratch, how do you begin planning to record for spatial audio?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm going to steal from Charles Klein because, well, Charles is brilliant. And the very first thing he said was monitoring. You need to be able to see it. So spatial audio, you need to be able to listen to it. So you need a good monitoring system. And I would also say you probably need some of the consumer monitoring tools, AirPods Pros, so you can hear how the consumer is going to hear this. Then begin immersing yourself in what is already happening in spatial audio and listening to what Apple's just released. And then what is the record that you're recording? What is it? What's the concept? What is going to bring the emotional connection of the music through spatial audio? How you're going to enhance it and not detract from it. If it's a pop tune, you may be just tracking, and then you're going to make those decisions in the mix, and maybe you're adding some additional elements that can be put spatially. If it's classical music and you're trying to capture some kind of space, then I could be looking at additional height microphones that could be essentially doing what happens in a concert hall. There are cloud reflectors that give us early reflections down from the ceiling. Those could happen from the ceiling channels in spatial audio. So it's kind of like start with being able to hear it, then understand the system and our normal nomenclature and our way of working in spatial audio, which is still being worked out, much like in the early days of stereo. The Beatles did crazy stuff with the vocal in the left channel, which we don't tend to do these days anymore. So figure that out, and then what's the concept of the particular thing you're working on?
I really believe, and we were talking about this in we talked about spatial for like an hour in the pre-show today, and I really believe we're in the wax cylinder part of this evolution, of what's going on, because this was a weird niche that only a handful of people did until yesterday, and I've been having a sense that this was coming, have been trying to prep us as a group to get ready for, talking more and more about this, and wanting to, you can just see the trajectory of where Apple is going with it. And the tools are about to get a lot better. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for our membership to get really good at this, because there's a decade of innovation that's going to make I was just talking to somebody yesterday, there's a massive move right now. Anybody who still has the records of previous studio sessions are trying to mix it now into spatial. And so there's a lot of work that's being done right now. And if you listen to what is on Apple's spatial examples, very wide variety. And it's really fascinating. I spent about a couple hours last night with my kids playing it in a 7.1, space and listening to all the things that people are doing with the instruments. And what the biggest thing that I find, the number one thing I was left with was how much more you hear the instruments, because there's so many more places for them to go. It's not just left, right. And it's not nearly, when they do it right, it's not muddy at all. And you hear the bass over here and you hear little cymbals, and your brain now has a whole bunch of places to put it. And it's just richer at a level. And I think that, especially when you hear it in a good system, there's no comparison to stereo. Stereo just is like a little bit better than mono. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, to look at the question about recording, obviously multi-tracking is super important, right? To actually get all of those raw inputs. One of my passions is a cappella music, and I think of it actually the type that I enjoy is acoustic acapella, is what I call it, because so much acapella now is overproduced and couldn't be created, just with the 4 or 5 voices. But what I do with the band is an acoustic sound, and so I'm really excited to start playing with the recordings that we made in a live environment. That I have I multi-track every show. I've got about 70 shows that we've done, all in multi-track records. I can now bring them in and start placing them. I did it a little bit because I think I said once before, when you plug a receiver into a Mac, you can then go into the audio MIDI setup and tell it that it's 7.1. And now you can, just start editing in 7.1. So I played around with that, but I'm far more interested now in Spatial and getting the experience of sitting in the middle of 5 people singing in different parts is pretty exciting. Yeah,
and definitely the first thing is to listen to a lot of it. So I would get, AirPod Pros are great. The Maxes are really good for it. And then if you're really serious about it, you're going to want to get some kind of speaker system. And I would say if you're going to say, I'm going to actually mix something like this, I'd probably look at there's a Sennheiser system that's about $2,500. That's like, to me, for a physical system, it's kind of a minimum requirement from folks that I've talked to about it. Is because it has a lot of speakers in it. It'll bounce a lot of things around you. If you're really going to be serious about it, if you're playing with it, I think that the Max, or just a good pair of headphones is good, because it's going to simulate those to get started. But you really do need to hear a lot of the individual speakers, because you're trying to hear what they're doing with them, and you can hear some of that in the headphones. But when you hear the discrete speakers, you can really hear, we have a 514 in our office because we do a lot of this. I literally walk up to the speakers and listen to them, like what is that speaker actually doing sometimes? And so being able to kind of do that allows me to really figure out, but observing a lot of other people's work, like a good example is like we were talking about in the pre-show, Rush, Tom Sawyer is an unbelievable Atmos mix, except for the voice. Well, and that's subjective. I feel like the voice isn't set in the center speaker. It feels weird. I want Getty to come right out of that center speaker, and he's coming out of left, right, and it feels a little ghostly, which might be what the intention was of the artist. But I felt like it wasn't as present. I was watching another. I don't know if it's publicly available yet, but I was watching a music video that was mixed in Atmos, and for the first 3 minutes, there's no vocal, and you just hear stuff all around you, and then suddenly. I'll see if I can find it if it's available yet. But the singer starts to sing, and it's as if because we had spent so much time building out this space around us, that when the singer starts to sing, it's just so present right in front of you. Like it's just created this space in your mind that you can put someone right in front of you, and it's just more present than I'd ever heard any music ever of the singer, And so that's the possibility. But listening to those things, and what we're going to do is, I know a little about streaming in immersive, so we're going to find ways to go through some of this stuff and do some ear training for those of you who have the systems to support it. Be able to, even just headphones, be able to have us stream it and have office hours in that. So it'll be the first time I think anybody's done a class on Atmos in Atmos. Okay, we're going to go to the next question. We're running behind.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C.'s up next. Grant said a little bit ago that you can get 3 screens using a Zoom room for screen scrape. My experience is one screen has to be in gallery view to avoid getting very large John Doe is talking screen debris. How are you avoiding this? It originates from non-pin speakers in that room.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I tell you one thing I do is I just have one as active speaker. Lots of people try to pin them all, but actually you can use active speaker very comfortably. You can cut to it. If you have a gallery view that you're using, and then active speaker is just like a second behind, and then you can cut to it, and it works totally fine. And that fixes that problem for me anyway.
Yeah. I think that also we want to keep watching Zoom ISO, which I think is going to be a big piece of this, is being able to, what Andy's working on, Andy Carluccio and the crew at Liminal. That's going to fix a lot of those things. Go ahead, Grant.
Sorry, I was just going to add that Jonas also said that if you're screen scraping for NDI, you can do the application itself, and then those overlays are not on there. So that's another trick.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
When I screen scrape from another computer into a computer for the overall view, I always do a dead mic into the audio jack. That way, there's an audio source coming in, but it's going nowhere. It's usually just tapered off or plugged up, so there absolutely no sound comes in. That way, you don't get those overlays.
Next question.
Ken Jones of Seattle is asking the big question here. What is the criterion for downvotes here in Mukana? I've noticed several occurrences in the last few weeks. Seems a little cheeky to me.
I actually hold the record for the most downvotes. A question I asked had like it was like -9 or something like that. I don't remember, and it wasn't even that bad of a question. I don't understand how I got downvoted so heavily. I've dog fooded my own questions inside of the system. The downvote is actually really important because it allows here's a couple things is that it allows the audience to say, hey, I don't want to. We want to prioritize some of this stuff. If you only have upvotes, it's really hard. We don't use it that heavily because we get to almost every question. So it is rare that it's that important. As we get bigger and as there are more viewers, we won't get to the bottom of it. And the audience has to have the ability. Now, when we've done these in large events, you'll see the downvotes will literally be, 80% of the questions go whoop, and there'll be like 8 questions that the audience wants, and it's almost always the right ones. And it also makes the question asker, person writing the question, has to be accountable for, I am not asking the question only for myself. I have a question based on my background. I have a question that I want to have answered, but I have to think about the whole group when I ask that question of what are we interested in? How do I phrase that question? How do I make it short enough? How do I make it leverageable enough? And as we get larger, we as a group, you have to think about not only what you want personally, but also what we want as a group to answer. And the downvote is the check against that process. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Grant.
We call them producers for a reason, and producers are supposed to have opinions and make decisions. And sometimes that decision is, no, we don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think it's not a question of judgment on the question. It's about your interest level. And so you're just saying, I'm really interested in this and I'm not so interested in this. And it works really well. In Slido, you can actually see the numbers as well. So you can see which is how many have been up and how many have been down. It's a cool thing to see.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
Sometimes there's something to be said for any question that elicits a strong response, whether it's upvote or downvote. I've heard writers say that the worst thing is just to be ignored. So if they're getting a lot of reaction, that's better.
Yeah. And again, what we're building towards is a system by which we, there's going to be a point where we don't get to half the questions, and we have to be able to have a way to effectively sort that process as we get larger. Next question.
Dan H. in Erie, PA says, what's involved to convert an existing studio album into spatial audio, hoping for Abbey Road?
I think that typically the first thing is speakers. So I think that most of the studios that the smaller studios that I've seen convert have been 514. It has been a lot of what I've seen as far as that goes. You'll need an RMU that's going to basically drive that system to make that work. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing I'd love to see in spatial audio is the live versus the recorded album. So the recorded album, you feel like everything's around you, but the live album, you got to have that feeling like they're on the stage and you're hearing the guitar over here, you're hearing the vocal over here, you're hearing a bass player over here and stuff like that. So I think that there'd be one of two ways in that case.
But I will say that I've watched some live shows that have been just pushed into full spatial. It's more impressive. it's like that's a
you still have the crowd around you.
No. I mean the music's all around you, and you see them live, and the music's all around you. It's better. It's like we can. Again, we don't want to hang on to the past too much. Go ahead, Jeff.
To convert existing albums, you need the multi-track. And with something like Abbey Road or older Beatles albums, that's a little tougher because they did not have as many tracks, so things are not split out as much. So harder to convert those than more modern recordings.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stuart.
Has anyone done a comparison of what sounds better with older recordings, quadraphonic or the new converted versions?
Yeah, I don't think so yet. something to think about. Yeah. Next question.
Alan Snyder is up next, and his question from Cedar Rapids, Iowa is, Alex, Bill Davis, Ken, Nigel, your backgrounds, what are they? Standing boards, some kind of screen, pull-down screen? So he's talking about not our back CV, but what's behind us. They don't look like they are virtual. Could you put some link suggestions into Mukana, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, dropped him to Mukana, the Lasterlight collapsible reversible background, 6x7 white mid-gray. That's what Alex recommended, and I use that for everything.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, mine's a just a IKEA roller blind, but then with a quite expensive aperture P300C to light it.
See,
that's what I don't know.
It's starting to show up. Like we're starting to figure all this stuff out. Yeah, that's gonna be great. The Lazerlight has been the one that I found is just the easiest to set up because it's got a hard edge. You just pop it open like you would one of those car reflectors, and then you just need to find a way that you're going to hold it up. And then I have a mixed panel 60 that has got color, so then I just decide what color I want the background to be. Next question.
Moving on to
sorry, go ahead, Jesse, real quick.
I would definitely go 6x7 or bigger. Beware the smaller ones. I bought a green screen that is a little too small, and I can't get far enough away from it.
Yeah, I'm about 4 feet from mine, which means that I don't have any contact shadowing and everything else, and it's just barely big enough for how I have this set up right now. So 6x7 is minimum requirement in my opinion. Next question.
Okay, and mine's vintage. I can't even remember who made it. Alan Snyder is up next. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Gabriel Ung, Malaysia, is in with, when bringing in multiple callers in vMix or MimoCall, are they able to talk off camera like in a Zoom green room with each other before being brought on stage?
It's not actually something that I know. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's how you set up the return feed so you can actually make a multi-view and pick who you want on that screen for them to see, and then you can route the audio to say you want them to hear these people, so you can create a virtual green room essentially.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I have to ask because it sounds awesome. Am I the only one who's hearing music right now?
You are the only one that's hearing music. It might be just in your head. None of us hear any music.
For loose fillings and AM.
Yeah, you've got
now, but it was great.
Next question.
Moving on, Mason Lancaster of Pasadena, California. What's recommended to connect a Wacom One to an M1 MacBook Air? Docking solutions with added capability beyond dongletown are also welcome.
By the way, Stuart, the music is fine. When you have to worry is when you start hearing the voices. That's the part where you have to put your foot down and go see. But the music is fine. The Wacom One. Because I believe that what you're talking about is an M1 MacBook Air that only has one USB. Go ahead, Charles.
I do believe that Wacom actually sells a cable. Some of the artists that I've been working with bought that cable and they've been using it with the M1. So I would start there. On B&H, it says that it has an HDMI out, which is slightly different from the cable. So yeah, I would just go to Wacom, start there.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm just kind of warning people as we move forward, and people are doing a pretty good job of this, is that starting probably next week, we're going to start sorting by tag. And so just a little ad that we won't see your question if you don't tag it starting next week. So there's a couple of questions in here that are untagged that we're still using, but you'll have to tag it first hour or we just won't even see it. So just as a note. Next question.
Jonas Stautel, our friend from Reutlingen, Germany. Alex, what is your workflow settings to stream 1080p to YouTube? The Man in the Kitchen stream looked a lot sharper and better than what I normally see on YouTube.
So there is we're basically going we're routing it to an ATEM switcher and then out from there to to an elemental encoder. But there's a lot of things that could encode it. At this point, you kind of want a hardware encoder, in my opinion, but you could put it through vMix and it'll work as well. vMix and Wirecast and OBS all have the capability of doing 1080p. What makes it different, what has changed it, is that Zoom limits to 720p on the stream, and by screen scraping, we're getting 1080p. So that's what's making it better. And we have better access. We can do graphics. You can now see an open countdown clock. And so it's no longer this, if you noticed this morning, I mean, we're still getting through this, but you can see that very quickly, I'm going to get to a point where I can we come out of the countdown clock and I start, and start working through that. And so we don't have to do that weird thing where I hit start and then I have to watch it and then I have to go over this thing and do this thing and do this thing and worry about the host. I can hand the host off anytime. So by screen scraping it, we can get all of those things. We're working on the next generation of that. Will be Zoom ISO, which means we'll just be grabbing everything and pushing them out of SDI, in our case, and being able to eventually get the whole panel, into the Constellation. And that's where things become more useful, is because the Constellation has 40 inputs. We can bring in the entire panel and have them all in the switch. And then there's a bunch of other things that are kind of interesting in that area. When you start mixing Zoom OSC and Isadora and Zoom ISO, you're able to build a show that is way more complicated than anything else you can do, all using, a variety of these integrations. So for instance, I can, where we're going to get to is I can go, we're going to build a super source with this person, this person, this person, this person, and hit go. And we don't line it all up. It just goes, whoop, there it is. And so those are the things that we're going to be capable of in the not too distant future. Go ahead, Sky.
You said bring all the panelists in. Is there a number? I mean, what, 40, 50, 100, 12?
We're going to limit it. So 32 is the max that we're going to have there. Now, remember, most things you watch on TV are like 6 at max. so we're going to go to 32 at max. I find that I don't think I need any more than 32. I have a theory that if we had a different specialty every day of the week, we probably don't need more than 16, 24 maybe. And most of our shows are in the 20 to 24 range. And so 24 is probably all we need. I won't go over 32. We used to have panels that were in the 40, 45 range. It's actually too hard, for me I can't figure out what's going on. And I find that from a human perspective, it's easier for me to deal with about 24 is kind of my max. So there's some headroom there with 32. But I think that we'll probably be leaning more towards 24 hosts. And as we get larger, of course, we'll have to be a little bit more figuring out who's going to be in for each day, and maybe different every day. As we have some regulars, and then we have some folks that really come in for those days. And like audio might be, there's 8 people that they have the slots if they want them. So that there's the 8 specialists that we have that we want to make sure that they're there. The guys, folks like, Jeff and Todd and Mickey and, Greg and those types of folks. And so that they would have some guaranteed spots if they want them, but they'd have to schedule them. I think that's kind of where we're going to end up going, is they just have to confirm. Right now, it's just like whoever shows up every morning. And so there'll be some point, we have almost 200 people that have volunteered to help us do this. So over the next period of time, we'll be building kind of teams to kind of manage all of this. Yeah. Next question.
Paul King in Northern Virginia says, what are your preferred earbuds for out in the wild or not in the studio specifically?
Go ahead, Charles.
I'm a big fan of the Apple stuff, but I have to say that my ears fit all the Apple stuff perfectly, so I don't feel them and I forget that I have them on. I've gone an entire day with them on. That's not everybody's experience, so I would start there, but these have been great with noise canceling. Amazing.
Yeah, Jesse?
I use the Apple Powerbeats Pro. That's what I have in this ear. What they have that the ones Charles has doesn't is there's a physical control at the top for volume, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Todd.
There are literally, hundreds of these things. The thing that I like to always recommend are the comply covers that kind of squish and then re-expand in your ears. So if you don't have molded earbuds, you can put those on a lot of things. So I take a look at those.
And we're gonna move on to the next question, and I'm just gonna let our editor know that we're gonna probably go a little over. We still got a bunch of questions here, and for the test, so we won't switch into the other version of this just probably until about 8:10. Let's go to the next question. We're gonna start speeding up. Next question.
Brian Becker, Charlottesville, Virginia. What's a straightforward method for adding LUF meters and other recommended audio meters to my workflow? Currently streaming vMix or MimoLive program out via Atem Mini Pro. Route audio to a separate dock computer with Dante, perhaps, or any other software or hardware recommendations?
Yeah, go ahead, Todd. Oh, can't hear you, Todd.
Oh, so sorry. I have mine routed in through Audio Hijack into Insight, into Isotope Insight, and that's how I get my meters.
That's great. Jeff, then we'll move on.
If you're coming off an Atem Mini Pro, take the HDMI multi-view output and split that, strip your audio off of there, because that's actually what you're streaming. So you last part of the chain.
Next question.
From Emily Rousseau, one of our education panelists from Red Hook, using AirPods Pro, and I have issues where the caller is hearing everything I'm doing. I was walking dog the other night, and the caller was distracted by the background and wind noise. Any way to remedy this or future fixes on the horizon? Using the phone has better sound quality, but not hands-free.
Yeah, it's the mute. You need to mute while you're doing it. A lot of us get really, really good at muting, but it is hard when you're trying to do something else to mute in and out. One of the things I tried to persuade manufacturers to make years ago was in the wired one is to have a physical mute or push to talk, wherever I just only push in to talk where I wanted a physical one. So I absolutely knew I was muted when I wasn't talking, and no one would build one. so there are some Bluetooth tools that are made. In fact, if you go to Unity's website, I think Unitycom's website, they might have some, but there's some Bluetooths that will talk to your phone, and you can tap on them somewhere other than the phone, and they will mute. But it's not 100%. That's the problem with the Bluetooth setups, is that you might hit it and it doesn't work all the time, much like our Stream Decks. Bill, and then Beju, real quick.
Really quickly, clicking on the stem also turns off transparency if you're used to having.
She's got the AirPod Pros though, so it's not the.
She still has transparency, so I'm just saying if she's used to listening with that on, she may think that she's not
a
straight thing, and she's not. She's not listening to isolated.
Right. Beju.
Yeah, might be better to see if she needs the noise cancellation. She might have to look at better options, other options which do better, more aggressive noise cancellation for clearing stuff out, like the Blue Pirates or even the Plantronics.
Next question.
Jeffrey Powers, Madison, Wisconsin. Is there a good over-the-ear headphone, single or double ear, that can stay fairly invisible for the viewer?
Over the ear? No, I don't think so. I think once you go over the ear, you're over
the person has cauliflower ear and they can't put an earbud in. So I remember from the 90s you had the over-the-hook ones, but I was hoping there was something.
You mean over the ear like this, or you mean over the ear like this? Like
over the ear like this.
Yeah,
but small enough it can't be seen, and hookable, or just like I said with the 90s headphones.
There are some ones that just hook up over and sit over top of your ear. There's some, they come up over, and I don't know who makes them, but they kind of come over. It'll still be a little bit of a bulb, but it'll be a lot lower profile. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, Sony had one, a small 3.5 millimeter, and it just sits over your ear, and it's not too terribly thick. It's not like a headphone cup.
Goes back behind the head, but there's definitely some that'll do that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. With iOS 15 and Mac OS Monterey will have spatialized audio functionalities, simulate spatial audio for non-Atmos content. Do you think that there should be a flag to disable that for content where the producer or engineer feels that it would detract from their vision, or should it solely be up to the consumer?
It should solely be up to the consumer. I'm sorry, but once you put it out there, let the consumer watch it the way they want to watch it, or listen to it the way they want to listen to it. I think that this whole I want to control how everyone sees my thing is absurd in my opinion. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because how can we now control what we see or hear, the creative content of the actual creator, right? And now we're actually closer than ever to actually being able to do that, whether it's color or a sound. Now, that being said, I listen to a lot of stereo stuff, but I do have rear speakers that are mimicking what the front ones are doing, and the center stage is right where I sit, and I tend to love that experience a lot more than just the front firing.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I'd just like to point out that there is actually a union of directors and cinematographers who have gotten together to petition TV manufacturers to have an option where everything turns off. and you see a film
I think having
the way they wanted it, but having it on audio might be tougher because people set their audio up so that they, like if they're hard of hearing, they want to be able to hear it properly. So
I think people,
and of course, the counter to that is Christopher Nolan.
I think that the idea of a user being able to hit a button that turns it all off or makes it to watch that, I think is totally valid. The creator inflicting that on everybody and being able to switch the way that their TV works because they've decided they want to do that, I think is getting to a point where people won't buy into that. So I think that's the problem, is that, people won't, they'll just be like and the problem all these creators are going to have is that I can just tell you, as someone who spends a lot of time watching 120 frame per second video, once you get used to it, you're not going to be able to watch 2398 much longer. The old people will be able to do that, but the kids won't because they're already watching games at 120 frames a second. When they start watching video at 120 frames per second, which is every Apple device by the end of the year, film feels very sluggish, for you. And it's something that I get challenged by all the time because I watch films and I just go, wow, I can see every frame. And it's really frustrating. Next question.
Douglas King in Seattle saw a question that suggested bringing your own internet. Besides using my phone as a hotspot, what are ways to bring fast internet to a remote location?
So many ways. There's obviously bringing a MiFi. Yeah, that's what some version of that. That's what Stuart's showing up there. You can also you can bring a satellite truck, basically with a buck, and you're going to turn that satellite truck into an internet connection that can usually, the most we've gotten out of it is about 100 megs a second up and down. There's a little bit of latency because it's going to space. You can do microwave. So if you have a line of sight to somewhere that has fast internet connection up to about, realistically up to about 10 miles, although that can go longer, you can get a gigabit connection to that location. You just have to line of sight to somewhere that has it. So those are the biggest ways that we've done that, other than just finding a neighbor and running a cable to it, which we've done too. We've literally walked up to people's houses and go, hey, so I'd pay you $100 for today if you just let me hook into your, put a QoS box at your WAN. And they're like, most neighbors will say yes. So if they have a really big house, they'll say no. But if they have a smaller house, they'll say yes. A bigger house, you have to pay more. Now, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I pack around the M1 plus the iPad with the cellular built into it, and then I throw a Speedify on that, and I bond everything together. So if I have a venue that has Ethernet plus Wi-Fi plus my hotspot, I just throw them all in here. And that way, for connectivity, if I'm streaming, it's a different story. I'll use something else. But this is helpful to have Speedify with a hotspot.
Yeah. Next question.
Miguel Lopez Waterman, our friend from New York, says, would it work to allow untagged questions to be posted? We talked about that earlier.
To not allow it. Yeah, I think that actually makes sense. Well, I'll talk to Chris about that. Someone should put that in the Mukana suggestions inside of Discord, and we'll just set it so that you can't post it without a tag. That's an incredible idea. Next question.
Beju Gadia, our friend from India, says Atmos is at it again. Shinobi 7 HDR monitor with 2200 nits, peak brightness, 4K 60p HDMI and SDI, custom LUT support at US $700, supports log, PQ, HLG, limited camera control from your monitor screen, Zcam E2 only at present, but hints to future support for others and has a link to it. So Atmos is...
Looks really, really good. Go ahead. Atomos, I think, is the... go ahead, Guy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Atomos.
Yeah, you're seeing me on a Zcam E2 right now, and it's an interesting camera because it has such a small screen, and I have a different monitor by a different company that allows you to manipulate the on-screen display, all the controls, iris, shutter speed, ProRes, switching formats, all of that. It's amazing. So I can't wait for other manufacturers to actually enable this, because I've seen it now on the Zcam, and as soon as Blackmagic and some of the other manufacturers enable these hooks, then it'll be Canon, Sony, but then you can use just these monitors to control your camera and have the full interface, but then have a smaller screen on the device. So we might see more cameras start to get this kind of red or really small box camera format. So that's cool that Atomos has come out with this.
It's interesting and it's probably a price point thing, but it's interesting that they don't support vision, given that other Atomos tools do. So it's an interesting choice in that area. Now, next question.
Kyle Hammond, Chicago, says, there was a conversation about routing smart devices on a separate network. Where would be a good place to start with that?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so you'd want to separate those smart devices. I assume you're meaning like Internet of Things on its own separate network. So you'd start with a managed switch that allows you to define VLANs, and then a firewall in between your internal network and that the Internet of Things VLAN, so that traffic initiated from the IoT network can't go into your private network. So keep those things separate.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas is curious if anyone's using a Zoom phone.
A Zoom phone. Oh, this is the new. Is there a new branded phone that does that? I'm actually not familiar with the Zoom phone. There are some phones that will use SIP to jump into Zoom, but I think that I do think that Zoom is talking about that, but I haven't used them. Next question.
Moving on, this is from Douglas Carmichael. When mixing and mastering, what tool would you recommend for sending audio in real time from the DAW to a mobile device for previewing mixes? And he's used Rogue Amoeba's Airfoil before, but he's open to other suggestions.
I am, I think Airfoil is probably if I'm previewing mixes, I guess I don't usually use a mobile device for it. So usually I have some kind of wireless or I have just headphones to it. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm not usually doing this in real time. It's usually I'm dumping a mix into Dropbox and picking it up on my phone and listening at a later time to check it. But Airfoil is a great option for real time.
Next question.
Comes to us from, again, Douglas Carmichael. In this Netflix guidance document for remote color grading, they mentioned that LG OLED's C8, C9, or CX models, along with a couple of Panasonic models and a Sony model, can be used to pre-grading at home. Wouldn't you want to use a professional level display with smart features and so forth for production? And then you have a document.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so this happened in the beginning of the lockdown. A lot of us went home and very few people had an X300 or a Sony or a Flanders. So what we ended up doing was to contact Netflix, and we figured out, okay, we could use the CX and the C9s and calibrate them. It was a hurdle, but some of us got it. But you needed to know the limitations of the processing and the monitor, because even after you did your grade on those screens, you still had to send it to a mastering monitor back at the studio to be approved to then be sent out. Now, out of these, I would always go for the Panasonic. That has been like the standard of pro-consumer TVs for color.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, when watching many large-scale TV events like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, they give credit to the helicopter pilots and camera operators as unmanned aerial system technologies advance. Could you see UAs replacing manned helicopters and aircraft in the broadcast industry? And he notes currently most small US UAs don't have long loiter times, but I assume you could use a larger platform with broadcast quality camera and transmission systems attached.
Go ahead, Stuart.
They actually already have in some places, but do be aware that in some cases they can be affected by what's going on the ground. One of our local broadcasters, going back about 20 years, tried to go to a radio-controlled helicopter over the top of race cars, and the updraft coming off the cars caused a failure of the aerodynamics of the helicopter. So you end up with a shower of parts everywhere. Yeah. So you just got to be careful with how close you get to moving objects.
One thing that we've done for some of these things is that you have you can set up a system where the drones will take off and land. They don't. One of the things we try to stay away from is actually controlling them. We can take over if we have to, but we want them to know where they're supposed to go. And so they have pre-programmed areas that they're going to kind of keep on covering, like long dollies. And then when they run low on battery, they just go back and another one takes off and does it. So you're basically, 2 or 3 of these are constantly cycling. There is some downtime. You can tighten that so that you have 2 of them that basically go on one side of the zone and on the other side of the zone. So the first one starts at the front end of the zone. The other one might be 50 to 100 feet away. And then that one starts and this one takes off and goes back. And so you can keep general coverage over this. Now, this isn't right over top of anything. This is way over top of things, to kind of, keep that process. We haven't done it over a lot of a large population. so that's something you want to, that takes a lot of permits So we've done it over things that we wanted to cover that have more sparsely populated. And so you just got to be really careful once people are below it. But small drones are relatively, I mean, everything's dangerous at velocity, but small drones are, less problematic in a lot of ways. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael said, has anyone used virtual room simulation technologies like NX to mix in headphones when a treated room is not available? And what have your personal experiences been? And notes some equipment there.
Has anyone played with that? Like a virtual room experience? No? All right. Next question.
Okay, we're going to Lucas Herzog. And Lucas says, excuse me, I was in the wrong place to click. Can you briefly describe how to get this cleaned up Zoom view in Screen Scrape?
Yeah, so we did that. We talked about that a little earlier. We just simply take a HDMI out, put it into a router, put it into a switcher, and then just push it out to an encode. So it's not too complicated there. All right, so we're going to switch. There's nothing that's going to change. So this is what we're switching to now. And Bill, we're going to try to get you a little less headroom, just have you set up a little bit more in frame. That's part we have to figure out. And so we're switching the format. What we're experimenting with is not disrupting the show. So we can continue to talk about it as we go into that second hour. Nothing's changing other than me talking about it. But on the back end, if folks are looking at YouTube, you may see kind of a change in the look as we kind of move through this. What we did is we grabbed a couple folks that we're going to keep permalinked, basically locked into it. So if we do a super source, for instance, you may see a couple people that are all part of that, and then what we can do is pin other people that are in the panel together. So there's a way that we basically set it up so that we can kind of jump from one person to another doing super sources. And so it does mean that it's important. It's more important probably than ever for all of us to be looking straight ahead. So like Guy, for instance, is in the super source right now and looking sideways. So this will be one of the things that we have to kind of figure out there is this. The interesting thing that we can do as a group that's different than what anybody else can do in the world is that we get to do this every day, and we get to learn how to be a participant inside of this very complex experience, how to be a host inside this very complex experience, and how to build a back end for this very complex experience. And nobody else has that. So, because you have different guests all the time, you have different, and so building all the interactions is going to be something that we will continue to have to figure out, as we move forward. So, anyways, we're going to, continue the conversation. I'm going to open up my talent comms are opened for Mauer, who's listening in the background. So if you need to direct me to do anything, let me know. But otherwise, we're just going to assume that we're going to continue to have the conversation. The advantage of this, by the way, as we look at Thursday, and the reason we're testing this means that we can go back to more of the webinar kind of thing that we did. Instead of what there's a couple things. One is that I felt like the latency when we're all separated into the different hardware, for some discussions that works great. For ours, at the speed that we normally work at, I could feel a little bit of the sluggishness in that process that happens when we push it through the hardware. The second thing is that it kind of had this. It just felt very more sterile than what we normally have here. So our goal is to have more of the panel, involved. It might not be the whole panel. Like we're going to still be a smaller panel as we work on it, but we'll take a handful of folks from our normal panel, mix it with developers, mix it with other folks, and then have us, we'll have some regulars that are set up for that, but more people can talk. So anyway, that's what we're going to be figuring out is how to make that a little bit more office hoursy than what we did on Monday, which I think it was a great conversation. We had some great subjects, but it was a different show. Like it was a show that had lots of Q&A that was backed up by folks, but I think that it wasn't office hours, and so, which was fine. I was really nervous about it. There was a chance that it was going to get heavily go out to millions of people, and so I was concerned about trying to figure something out in front of everybody. But Thursday we're going to be a little bit more aggressive about how that looks. So anyway, that's coming, and that's what we're working on. But we'll continue to deal with the questions. So if you have questions about Office Hours 2.0, again, we're just experimenting on our end about what that looks like. So we'll just keep on playing with it. And in Mauer, if there's something you want me to test, just you can talk into my ear, but hopefully not while I'm talking. So anyway, Bill, let's go ahead to the next question.
Okay, we come to one from Gabriel Ung in Malaysia, and he says, in Office Hours 2.0, how are lower thirds generated and appeared on the program? Text boxes are nicely designed like PNG files, but are dynamic according to the length of the questions.
Yeah, so that is a very low tech solution. So the lower the questions that are being posted in lower thirds are actually that's a web page. So Mukana has its own lower third output. And so what it can do is it can grab onto that, dynamically scale it, draw the line around it and design it. And we can decide what the color behind the text is as well as the background color of the overall window. So we're literally just Luma keying a web page into it. So it's a very simple solution to make that work. We have plans to make that more dynamic and do something more interesting. But right now, what's nice about it is anybody who's got a web browser can just open up the lower third thing and just start keying it into the system. So it's relatively simple, and we've used it for many years. Next question.
Our next question comes from Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen, Germany, who says, is the countdown song the new Office Hours theme?
I don't know if it's the Office Hours theme. I just thought it would be really fun. It's a recording that I have. I recorded that in 2005 badly. It was a bad recording. I cleaned it up a little bit. It was a very low level recording. I had come right in. That's a Chiwanizu Marari and that was recorded at the Book Cafe in Harare, Zimbabwe. And Chiwanizu was a good friend of mine. And so anyway, so it means something to me. So and most of the names of our products are all coming out are in Shona, which is out of Zimbabwe. And so So I thought it'd be fun to play it. I think it's a really great song. So, and it just is really fun. And it doesn't, we tested it and doesn't flag anything. So, I think that it's fun that her album version sounds very different. This is a live version of her playing that song. Go ahead, Jeff.
Victor's not here, so I have to put in a plug, but I do know a place where you can find a bunch of musicians and recording engineers.
Definitely plan to. I'm just doing this for fun. It's just, it was as we started to play with it, we're definitely going to have the musicians here build something that will be the show. As we do the R&D, I'm just playing with this song just because it was fun to put it up there. But we're absolutely going to have a Office Hours theme and process to it, as we move forward. So we'll absolutely include everyone here. That would make the most sense. I just thought as we were doing R&D, it'd be fun to use something that I haven't published in the past. So, and we may still use it as a close or something like that. It's some of my favorite music is out of Zimbabwe. So anyway, next question.
Jeff Francis is here next from Columbia, South Carolina. In Office Hours 2.0, do you plan to edit question text before it's displayed as lower thirds for clarity, conciseness, content, and so forth?
Yeah. So one of the things that will happen as we have more people to manage it. So, I see that, a future somewhere where we have a variety of people in the back end, making sure that we're not repeating questions, cleaning questions up, making them more readable. Even one of the things that we've started to see is Carl has been putting up these great images of things that we're covering. So imagine a producer group in the back end kind of putting together images and stuff live. And let's throw this stuff together. Let's throw this example together. Things that we're kind of hacking through right now. A lot of these questions are sitting for 30 or 40 minutes, while it waits to get to us. So there's time for a back-end team to kind of be building up these things. And if we start figuring out how to build those templates, again, we get into this position where we can build a show that no one's ever seen before because it's all happening live. It's all discussion. It's all, a process, but there might be 3, 4, 5, 10 people in the background, and what happens is you have each person just going down like, I got this one, I got this one, I got this one, I got this one. And we have moderator tools internally, for instance, that can just route those. So someone can just go route this to, there are going to be 10 people that are developing graphics, and you can just route the questions to that person. So they don't have to look at all of them and they don't have to say anything. They just go, okay, that's the one I'm going to work on. Of where can I find some imagery? Where can I find this? Where can I, and some of it will work and some of it won't. But after, 3 or 4 months of doing it, or maybe 6 months of doing it, I think we end up with a really data dense show. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Will there be a spot where we actually get to see the original question before the editing, just in case it's hard to understand what they were trying to ask, and then we can kind of look at it and go and maybe they mean this or something like that.
As we get a higher volume of questions, it'll be more incumbent on the question askers to be really clear, because things will just get sorted out if they're not clear. Like there'll be less of them where we just try to figure it out. And that's going to be the nature of it getting us having. There's going to be a point in the next 6 months where we just get 2 or 3 times more questions than we have time to answer, and so we're not going to. We can't answer everything in a minute or 30 seconds. And so we're going to then have to, shift over to a different style where it's really important to vote. It's really important to be clear in your questions. And if we see one with a couple of words that might need to be fixed, we'll fix it. But if it's a confusing question, it probably will just get pushed back to the person, maybe with a comment like, hey, like what I'd like to do is build something in where the editors can look at it and just send it back to them. Like, we don't understand what this means. Please rephrase, or rephrase for tomorrow. Because it's general, just come back tomorrow with a better version of that question, and so that's the kind of stuff that, we hope to, build up, is an entire infrastructure that allows for that to happen in real time, with potentially a lot of people. And because it's all web-based, it's easy to, have a bunch of people working on it. Next question.
TJ Asher's up next from Minneapolis and here on the panel most days. For those who cut the show like Stuart is doing today, will they still cut the show like we have done for the rest of the producers in Zoom?
I know this is all just really focusing on me. Go ahead and for Mauer, definitely go to 6ups or whatever you want to test as you work on it. There'll be some point where that stops. so that I don't know exactly where that'll stop. The reason is that as we what we're building into the back end is the ability for either a producer or editor or the host. So let's say Stuart, Jeff, and Sky raise their hand. Like they won't have to do it per question. They'll be able to look down all the questions and just tap on the ones they want to answer. They don't, they just go, I want to answer that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. On our end, we're going to start with Jeff, then Stuart, then Sky, or in this next one, we're going to do Kenn and Stuart, and we put those into the system. Then the goal is that when we tap on a button, it'll immediately build the super source, like from that. So then it all becomes centralized. And again, it will be all web driven so that it's actually too much for a TD to manage. like it's too much. Like what we're about to build is this integration between hardware and software and, other things that you actually as a person can't do. And so the goal is to move, now that we've moved a lot of our individual cameras up, and then as we bring the graphics up and the playout up, now we start building a new kind of show that really takes full advantage of what we have in front of us. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, then things like the screen scrapes, like we showed the Atomus Ninja there. Will that be used still, or would that be
the individual users? Eventually, the individual users won't need to do that. They'll, that team will be building up those and possibly putting those up. But the idea is a lot of that stuff will be delivered to the TD. So per question, so the things get flowed in and the TD will see inputs in there, like here's something you can cut to, here's something you can put in, and then we'll be able to define, all of those. And the question as we move forward will be eventually, do we really need, we will need a TD, but will they need to cut every single thing, or can we abstract a lot of that, out? And so, that's another piece of it. On a day-to-day basis, what we want is someone to be able to run the switcher from anywhere in the world. And so, or run the switch, whether it's, the switcher, the ATEM becomes this kind of brain, but who runs it and how they run it. Again, looking at what Victor's been pioneering with Andy and TJ and Andy, the idea of having a touch screen where they, people are touching things and hitting things that they want to go up, and all those other things that are coming together, but they don't necessarily need to know anything about the ATEM, to actually put together the show on a day-to-day basis. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, the demo that the guys did yesterday, with the Yamaha, it's awesome. I mean, I literally can't use the words that I want to say because we have a clean show, but it was that awesome.
Oh yeah.
But since there's such a prevalence of ATEM hardware in this group, is there a way that all of the audio could be done in an ATEM mixing platform?
Possibly. I mean, it's definitely a discussion that we have about it. We could convert it because
using what's a DNS or whatever. Can't I reach into your machine and launch my ATEM software and control the faders? The problem is it just doesn't have all the. I don't know, maybe it does.
Well, there's two things. One is that you could possibly push it all into Matty and then just run it all in there. The trouble we get into is all the mix minuses and everything else that the ATEM doesn't really have.
That's right.
So there's a lot of infrastructure there that we're using that would be difficult to do there. So if they got a little further down the path and let us build a more complex mix, that wouldn't be out of the question to make that work. Right now, it doesn't have the capacity to do it. But what you really want is not necessarily to give that up, but to have a beautiful Q01 with all the stuff, but only abstract what you need to control for the show. So on there's a bunch of setup for the show, but then there's moving sliders, and those sliders can be driven by OSC. And so then OSC means we can drive that, so there's a bunch of things that you could even have it where if it goes into a 4-up, it automatically just pulls everybody else back, or something like, they can do a lot of things where, again, we can start interacting because of Zoom OSC, we know who's talking, we know who's where, so building an interaction where we know where everything is, we start to be able to do things that are much more complex than anything that you normally do in a studio. Next question.
Comes from Stuart Fairweather here on the panel in Melbourne, Australia, and as was just noted, mixing the show right now, or cutting the show. Should a person asking the questions be in the 2.0 grid view?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, somebody must have read my question because Bill is now in the 2.0 grid view. It looks fabulous, of course.
I keep worrying about my headroom because it was mentioned before. I'm thinking I got to lower that camera and get.
One of the things we're going to have to do again is build a guide, for exactly where we need them as we start to put them into those grid views, and that's another piece. And again, this grid view, we'll look back at the grid view that we're doing now that looks really cool, and we'll be like, oh, that was so pathetic. I like that what we did first, but I'm really happy with it right now. I think Aaron has done a great job at putting these together, and Aaron has been working with Aaron Huselage. I just want to thank him for the great work that he's been doing with both Kevin Maurer as well as with Nate, and so there's been a lot of work over the last week of figuring this stuff out, and he's done a great job of putting this together. I'm just saying that as we get better at this, there's a whole bunch of other things that we're going to realize that we want, and it will look back at everything I've ever done. You look back a year and you just go, wow, that was where I thought that was going to work. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only thing that I wish, and maybe in a still image or versus the video, so it doesn't detract, is a way for us to see that grid view in the Zoom call, because I have it over here and I got to look over here to see if I'm where I am.
It's one of those things. Is what we're trying to figure out right now is we're trying to grab onto different things, and then we don't want when we go to the grid view. So this has to do with when we go to Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, because we have to be able to hide things. So right now the grid view would come back and it would still be an active caller. So we'd be able to see it inside of this thing, but then it would go out to the stream. And so we have to figure out a way to basically show all of these without showing that. And so we're working on it. We definitely have some ideas on how to fix that. We're just not quite there yet. Go ahead, Jesse.
Since we're clipping out the Zoom identifier of the person, one thing I feel is a little bit that needs to happen. I know that you bring up the person's name when they talk, but when I was watching on Monday, someone had not talked for a while. I think it was Ed. And I wanted to write a question specific to Ed, but I couldn't remember his name.
So again, that comes back to Zoom OSC and Isadora. So that's what we're going to probably use to solve that problem, which is that Zoom OSC will be able to identify every person as we clip on it and deliver the name that you have in Zoom to a lower third live, and then that'll be able to be keyed over. And so that's where we're leaning towards. We just haven't executed it yet, but you'll see it over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We'll have it where it starts to do that again. These are baby steps of where we're going with it. We were given the opportunity to kind of push really hard for Dub of let's just do a big hard push for 2 weeks of getting a bunch of it figured out. And then slowly over the summer, we'll keep on evolving, and we'll evolve for years. But what you're asking is absolutely valid. Yeah. Next question.
Comes to us from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. He says, is everyone on the panel in ears, and how do you hear IFB? Yep.
Yeah, almost everybody on the panel has got in ears. Does anyone not have? Chris has over the ears. So, but he still has ears. No, you're allowed to have over the ears, Chris. We know you're limited in your situation here, and
I have an earpiece. I was guilted and shamed into buying it. I found it uncomfortable.
Which one?
I got the one, whatever the one you said, so I could be cool like you. But I stand up and I walk away, which I know you hate. But it's last summer I was like this close to going. I had a whole shopping list from Mickey to have a full wireless thing. I could just walk around and.
You haven't done it yet, have you? You haven't done it yet, have you?
Guilt and shame.
I am thinking of getting mine not permanently, but for every day, have it set up with the Rode, or something like that, where I just have it clipped and I can just walk away because it's.
Is the Rode enough, or do you need to buy once, cry once a little harder?
I have the Rode because I was testing it already, so I have it sitting here, so it's easy. So I've already cried a little, so I'm just going to keep on crying a little before I cry a lot and get some kind of crazy, I have
Mark this day, June 9. No, buy once, cry once, a little harder.
Yeah. That's a good one. All right, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, mine's are plugged into the X5.
Yeah, that works
the
well.
battery lasts. Yeah, I mean, it is built like a tank, and the batteries do last. Well, even though I've got two, I can swap out if I never need to. But yeah, those are really good.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I'm a big fan of used gear too, and sometimes you can find a G3 Evolution series used, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a pair of Leilas that I actually don't use anymore. But yeah, these little Shure work just great. Almost any of them.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm using a Bluetooth 5 headset because I find that I can go to multiple rooms and still listen to the conversation, come back and sit down and be wireless. And just to clarify, I'm only hearing the Zoom, not the in-ear from whoever's doing the cut of the show. Because I thought
that's one of the limitations of this setup. So one of the limitations of the way we have it set up now is that we can't tunnel talk back to everybody. The way that we do with when we put people in individual rooms. Now I have Unity open on my computer, so I have it muxed in, so people can talk to me if needed. Next question.
Moving on, Dave Kaufman at Vancouver, British Columbia. Up next, can Alex briefly tell us more about your connection to Africa and the Shona language?
Yeah, so I started studying Africa in the early '80s. I was able to so what did you say, Chris?
I said briefly. I know you could do a whole second and third hour.
Second hour, yeah, exactly. So I got really into Africa and studied it a lot in the '80s. Reading old National Geographics that I inherited from my great grandmother. Everybody gets something, and I got National Geographics, and so anyway, I then started thinking about using media as an acceleration tool for emerging world countries. And so that led me to who speaks English, and where are the highest literacy rates? Where would it be the best place to do this? And Zimbabwe was at the top of most of those things in the 90s. So I spent a lot of time studying Zimbabwe specifically because it was only one of 2 or 3 countries that were available. I mean, that were possible to do what I was trying to do, and for a variety of math reasons. And so then I went to Zimbabwe in 2000, and it was just all the math made sense, but what really made sense was just the culture. People, just amazing. It was just, it was very pivotal 2 weeks. And now it happened to be in the middle of when all the farm uprisings were happening. So it was very exciting to be there. But, I learned a lot also about international news and how inaccurate it was because I had not left the country ever before. And I got to view what people saw in the rest of the world versus what I was seeing. And it shattered how I view the news, completely. And so what really became important for me was to figure out ways that people can tell their own stories, their own news, and how do we empower everyone to be able to tell their stories as opposed to having it come through a bunch of, old white men. So anyway, so that was, kind of my impetus and just got totally hooked to the music and the culture and the people and everything else. And so I was in and out of Zimbabwe. I probably spent more time in Zimbabwe than any place outside of the United States. I have, and so I speak a little Shona. I can understand it more than I can speak it, and just hung out with a lot of bureau artists and stone sculptors that are there, and then spent a lot of time in the country. Anyway, so I use Shono a lot. I find it's my favorite language to listen to. It's just a very musical language, and we say good morning and everything else, and in Zimbabwe it's magwanani mamukase, and like damuka kana mamukao. And the best one is in the afternoon. You say masquedase, and then someone says dasqueda kana masquedao, and the second one is always dasqueda. Like it's always how you put it back, and it's just a great language. And anyway, so a lot of Mukana and Kamenda and Wadzera are all things that are all come from the Shono language. Anyway, so that's my connection to it. And again, I know a lot of artists. Chiwaniza Marari was a great Mbira artist who passed away a couple years ago, and but she's a good friend of mine when I was there. So anyway, so that's the connection. Next question.
Oops, missed the button. Kyle Hammond in Chicago says, will the first hour and the second hour be the line between 1.0 and 2.0, or would that line be the 2.0 and 24/7 post show?
I mean, the 2 hours will continue to tighten. Now, the first hour will still always be this open Q&A, and then we'll have more and more where the second hour is almost always something that's a special thing, especially as we have more people able to manage that, and it's not just me trying to figure out what we're doing next week. We'll be planning out 2 or 3 weeks in advance, maybe even more. We'll be reaching out to folks. We'll be building things out. And so that second hour will become more and more produced. The first hour will still always be Q&A. It will continue to tighten as the speed and quality and everything else. It'll feel more and more like a broadcast show, but a new kind of broadcast show. And then we will eventually, the post show will start after that 2 hour blip and end right before the show starts the next day. So that's the goal that I have at some point soon, probably over the summer. We'll get to that point. What's missing is just people to be accountable for they'll be like, I need to break it into 2 hour blocks or 3 hour blocks or something, and find sponsors who are willing to be accountable for that time where, just it's a safe space for folks. And so we just have to have that managed through around the world somewhere, so that there's someone who's kind of managing that space. So anyway, so that's as we get that done, that'll break up. I also think there'll be more shows and other things. I mean, eventually we'll start. At first, that's the way it'll look, and then we'll start adding more shows. So that the 2 hours will become 3 hours and 4 hours. Probably not more than 6 or 8 hours per day, but maybe, we'll see. But again, we want to leave a lot of space for just open discussion as well. And then of course we'll do more focused things in Discord, and Discord eventually will make way for other things that we're working on. Next question.
TJ Asher's up next with, could the border around the questions match the border around the office hours logo and the panelist group?
Not currently. Because it's because of that sheen. We can only do solid lines right now. It's a limitation of the current system, but it's not out of the question in the future. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so we discussed this the other day after the long show, after the WWDC thing. I've been experimenting with doing flying keys. Mm-hmm. And I think a neat solve, it gets rid of the dynamic box, and we discussed this. I think a neat solve would be to have the box be constant. It could be either a separate key or
it could be a DVE with a key.
Or burned into the background. And then do a flying key transition between the name and have it slide down and slide up and be the question or something.
Yep.
And then you can, of course, craft the border to be exactly the way you want it.
Yeah,
I still think the logo would look better on the other side, too.
We're talking about putting the logo in other places, yeah. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago says, will there be tally lights to let panelists know they're in viewing program, a preview program, or does everyone get the view the panelists saw on Monday? Would it be difficult that would be difficult on a phone. Also, this is a long question to test. It just got to yellow. So,
yeah, we as we move forward with Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, there's definitely ways for us to tell you that it's been activated. And we just haven't gotten that far yet. So it'll probably take most of the summer to get it. It's a great question, and definitely what's going to happen is interactively in what we would, I guess the traditional way now is agile programming. We're going to keep on doing the show, and that's the big advantage that we have is we will keep on playing with the show and then programming backends and working on stuff and continuing to organically figure out what makes the show run smoother and more effectively. Next question.
Moving on to Stuart Fairweather's question, and he in Melbourne and here on the panel says, Andy, we know you're watching ETA on Zoom ISO for Windows specifically.
Yeah, Andy will have to talk to that. I know that I think he's focused on getting Zoom ISO for Mac to work well first, and then we'll move on. But yeah, next question.
Moving on, Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen, Germany, often a panelist here. Who is on the Office Hours team right now? Who planned the Office Hours 2.0 update?
I planned it, but the people who've been really working on it, Andy Lipnick has been working on the audio. Mickey has been working on the audio. Tucker has been working on some of the comms. Kevin Hansen's been working on a lot of the infrastructure. JJ has been involved as well as far as managing those processes. Nate has been working on the visuals and how that all works. Shannon Cooper has been in the background, kind of helping to pull all that stuff together. Kevin Maurer right now is doing the cut at the moment and also providing additional input and figuring those bits out. And Aaron Huselage has been doing the graphics. And so I think I said everybody that's been working on it right now in the back end. Go ahead, Stuart.
I've got obviously the Zoom cut going on and what have you, and I'm actually seeing the YouTube cut. So Kevin, that's smooth, mate. That's real smooth. Love it. Good work.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Next question.
Tommy Chance is next from St. Paul, Minnesota. When will we be informed with our new opportunities with V2?
So this week and last week has been just really hectic for me. So I had a bunch of other things going on. So starting next week, we're going to spend some time basically looking at everybody who said that they're interested in playing along. And starting to put people in. If we don't get to you, it's just we're trying to figure it out. And so there'll be a little bit of math that we put in. Obviously, folks that have been around for a long time will probably put in first into sections just because they've known the system longer. But we'll start putting people in and inviting people, hey, would you like to do this? We may send out another questionnaire that asks for a little bit more granularity of the people who said they were interested and what they're interested in. And what we're looking for is what people want to do, and then figure out how that matches up with what we need to do. And so we'll figure out, who goes into where. And our goal is to get to a point where we're shifting teams a lot. So we build a system, not necessarily a person that's doing those things. And so my goal in the long term is to get to a point where the team that manages every morning might change every single day. Like that is a different set of teams. Now, at first, it won't be that way. We'll try to find some people who are ready to do it over a period of time. As we figure it out. But the goal is to get to a point where almost every position is shifting every day so that we have as many people as possible interacting with it and figuring it out. We have to do a bunch of things, fix a bunch of things on our end first, which is this abstraction from, I can't give every person a VPN into my system. So we have to figure out like how how that all works, abstracting a lot of the controls, abstracting a bunch of other bits and pieces. But the goal is not only for us to figure out how to do a show like this, but to build a huge workforce that can do it. So a whole bunch of people, and some of you will be busy enough that you won't want to be the production group of this thing, but it'll be fun to learn, and you may take it on and do it on your own show. But the main thing is to build it so that if we had people who wanted to do it, or we want to do bigger shows, we continue to have more and more people that know how to run the system, because it will run, in my opinion, it'll probably run differently than any other system ever. So it'll be something that not only do we have to do, but we have to train ourselves to do. And then the goal will be to patch it out within our group, patch out how it works, and let other people, like we would build wiring diagrams and interfaces and how it works. And for people who agree with what we're doing, then they build their own, and then they have a large number of people that can do it with them. The goal is not for us to be the only ones. The goal is for it to be as spread out as wide as we can among our group. so that we'll try to find the most efficient way to do it. So it's not $500,000 of hardware. But it might be $10,000 or $15,000 of hardware, and eventually in the cloud. As we figure it all out, where we could run the whole show that way. Because of my interest in going into immersive and HDR and 4K and eventually 8K. I don't look at the cloud as a as a midterm solution for what we're doing in the show, but I do think that eventually we want to get there. Yep. Next question.
Ranjan Shandil of Los Angeles, California. Can you draw out on the telestrator the video, audio, chat, YouTube chain for office hours 1.0 versus 2.0 versus 3.0?
I don't think you have enough pixels available to you to get that much data on one screen.
Yeah, we'll come back to that and draw that out. And I haven't had time to reset my telestrator. I had some issues with it that I was making a change, and so we haven't. Oh, maybe we have it working. Hold on, let me look at my ATEM here. But we'll it's not done yet. So it's kind of like trying to describe a piece of concrete while it's still liquid. So we'll come back to that. Ask that question in a week, and I'll give you a better idea. Next question.
Aaron in Cincinnati, Ohio says, I'm making a family documentary with interviews. I'd like to keep my production costs down. What's the best free editor? I'm looking at iMovie built into my 2013 13-inch MacBook Pro or Resolve for an all-in-one editor. What do you suggest?
If you're willing to put the time in, I'd probably use Resolve over iMovie. Go ahead, Chris.
I would say this. Use iMovie until you can't do what you need to do.
It's the thing is that if you'll get to a point as you work on this that you'll wish that this was all in Resolve. If you're not spending any money, that's the only thing. iMovie is pretty limited, So if you're going to do one little video or you're doing fun little videos for TikTok or YouTube or whatever, I think iMovie works pretty well. If you're really trying to build a family documentary with interviews and there's going to be a lot of editing, you're going to run into that ceiling really fast in iMovie. And so, I do agree with Chris. You want to use it until you run into it, but you're about to start working with a lot of content. And I don't feel like iMovie does really well with long form, in my opinion. Once you get in over about 10 minutes, I feel like it just gets really heavy, and so it's just not what the general use case is for it. Go ahead, Jeffrey. And I've been using iMovie since it was released.
Just to throw another one out there, if you're willing to spend about $100, I know that Adobe has the Premiere Pro Elements, which is you buy it once and then install it, and then of course you'll have to buy upgrades as it goes, but that can give you more options as well.
Free Resolve runs rings around Premiere Elements, Adobe Elements. Like it's not even in the same. They're not in the same ballpark. So the free Resolve, if you really want something heavy, if you're trying to stay free, if I was going to cut a documentary, I would do it in Final Cut. Like that's the place that I would put it because of the metadata. So the metadata in Final Cut will make it much easier for you to, if you take advantage of that metadata, you can, and other people here can probably speak to it more elegantly than I will, but all those shoots and all your family members and what they talked about and all the other things you're able to annotate inside of Final Cut in a way that is not as easy to manage, and then you're able to find it super fast. So you spend that time ahead of time in the shooting as you bring it in, and Bill talks about this probably more eloquently than I do, but once you have all that metadata, I would never build any documentary I would build in Final Cut. Like it is like the beast for that. And a lot of edits, but for documentaries specifically, the way it uses metadata makes it the killer tool for making that work. Sky, real quick.
Well, as an editor, you're always looking for that shot. And
Right.
so the metadata is that pre-viz or pre-assigning what that image is that you want to find later at some other point. So you're needing it at a certain time in your story. And again, Resolve, working on a 2013 is the question. And that's where even Final Cut on a 2013 would be, would that be pushing it? Because again, it's a RAM-intensive machine. I mean, need.
Yeah, But again, you want to look at what you're going to. Again, if you're not going to spend any money, I would do it in Resolve. If you're going to spend some money, I would do it in Final Cut. Like those are the two that I would build in. Next question.
Moving on, join us. Tel Reutling in Germany says, can we create a GitHub org for office hours so people working on stuff for the community, or when there will be software created for 2.0, we could manage that there?
Yeah, I think so. I'm talking to Andy about how we structure that. I mean, because Andy Colucci is doing most of the customization at the moment, so it kind of leans into his what he wants to do there. So we are going to put something up there, but I have to figure it out. I I have a love-hate relationship with GitHub. So it's definitely not a love-love relationship. So I just have to think through it just a little before we start doing that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would a mobile Mukana client be useful for hybrid events so in-person attendees can vote on questions along with online attendees?
The funny thing about that question is that the original version of the precursor to Mukana was only in person. So it was it was for 200 people to ask questions in a room, and the server was local to that room, and they were able to ask the questions because it basically, I'm told, is why the World Bank doesn't put microphones in the room anymore. So, because it transforms that in-room experience because you don't have people grandstanding on mics. That's the biggest problem you have with microphones in the room, is that they slow the conversation way down. And so, and people go, well, you have that one moment where the person's, talking and everything else. And a Tony Robbins thing is much different than a general Q&A session, inside of a thing. But there's but one of the things that for every person that had that touching moment, there's 100 of them that are just droning on and then ending it with a question that no one cared about. And so, I know that, I've done hundreds of these, like hundreds. And I just like, it's 100 to 1 of a great question to long, droning, statements that are followed by questions that everyone just rolls their eyes at. And so it's because what happens when you put Mukana into the middle of that, or some kind of question engine, is that those people have to now be accountable for the question that they want to ask. And the one we did, there was diplomats, and these Japanese diplomats were trying very hard to talk about bluefin tuna instead of no one wanted to listen to them. And so there was this huge group of, how do we ask the question so that it gets voted up? And that's when I learned how powerful the down arrow is that you have to figure out how to ask the question so that people want to so that the group wants to term it. And they did. They figured it out, and then we asked the question. But it was a real hard, took a lot of CPU power to get that working. And so I think that the hybrid works really well, and we've definitely used it because it actually pulls the online audience and the in-room audience into one space. That now they can ask questions and so on and so forth. And you can use your cell phone right now with the mobile version of it. Eventually, there'll be an app for that. That'll do that. Probably not too far in the future. Next question.
Lucas Herzog is getting almost metaphilosophical on us from Mainz, Germany, and he says, "Is it possible? Is it this possible to be interested in helping? Is it possible to be interested in helping?
Be interested in helping?
Yeah,
I think it's possible. It's a state of mind. So you just have to be the interest. Next question."
But it takes us right back to Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers. Kyle Hammond in Chicago says, what's the panelist experience right now? Trying to give Alex a break. What is the panelist experience right now?
I think your experience is pretty much the same, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to experiment with here. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Jim.
Yeah, it's the same, except for probably for us that are in that 6-up, because once again, I can't see if they're showing the 6-up or me as a whole or me off screen. So the attentiveness has changed. I don't want to move too much or try to scratch somewhere on my face or anything like that. So that's a little bit of what I'm feeling right now. So and that's that's normal.
It's a little exhausting to not know whether you're online or not. And so we talked about that on the last one. So we have to figure out that process of how we get feedback back to the folks. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so I just handle it by not actually looking at the multi-view and just pretending it's not there. And I'm super thankful I have a teleprompter so I can stay focused, looking straight. But yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, given the difference from the Zoom rooms is that you feel much more connected now to the rest of the panel. So that's a much nicer experience. The Zoom rooms, you felt very isolated. So it's a really lovely experience. It is just like the normal show.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I would echo what Richard said because I was on. I've done both sides, but I have noticed that I didn't think I was such a fidget, but yeah, staying focused and staying still and you're much more focused on looking down the camera when you know you're in
one of those boxes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the hard part. Like when I'm on Mac break, I just get a return of the video feed, and the big thing that happens is that I readjust or I fix things or I take a drink of water or whatever when I know I'm off air. And when you don't do that for a long period of time, you don't know whether you're on air or off air. So that's the challenge. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Saying exactly the same thing. When I got back after my little trip, I had to reconfigure things because I'm looking off too much to see Mukana's over there. Right now, the feedback from YouTube is over to my right. So I'm conscious of, like, if I glance down, that's going to look different in this ISO shot when I'm in the 6-up grid than it does. And it's just odd. You get used to it. I know this happened to me in the original office hours. You know, you eventually get to that point of comfort where you know where to look next and you know how to control.
I think the big distinction is there's only 6 of us now instead of 20. So you feel like you're just kind of in a crowd when there's 20. Right. There's only 6. You feel very much like you're on. You know, so I think that's the distinction there. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, it was because it was interesting from the WWDC event where Rene was just looking at his computer for the entire time. It's a really fast difference between having that teleprompter and having a connection with the rest of the panel and the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll have to keep on tying that together as we keep on growing. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the same thing in the other view yesterday with the multi-view return. When it was green, I knew that we could pop on at any time. And then just today, I went to look at my monitor over here, and you're like, "Hey, Guy, you're in." I didn't even know, so it was like total, like I was clueless as to what was going out to air unless I opened up the YouTube, and then that's 30 seconds behind.
Right, so it doesn't help you a lot. Yeah, and I think we have to figure out that return. We just have to figure out a way to deliver the panel, this overall panel, back to us. And it might be that we never go to the wide panel in the second hour. Then what we can do is turn on the return, from one of these ZRs that are down there, turn the return on so that we see it. And we just know that this version of it will never go to screen. And that's a possibility as well. And that might be what we do tomorrow. Next question.
Dwight Carmichael is up next with, when building out large-scale lighting video systems, how do you plan your power and data distribution? Do you calculate power draw with a spreadsheet?
We do. So we talk about power draw in that area. Normally we over ask or over plan so much that we have a pretty good idea what the draw is, and then we double or triple that because we just know that a lot of things will get added. We do that. The other thing we do is we put a kilowatt. It's called a kilowatt. It's not a kilowatt. It's a kill-a-watt or some other, or we also use our UPSs to manage that, to know exactly what our draw is. And so we're building those up in the warehouse oftentimes to figure those things out. But on large scale, you absolutely have to figure this out in detail ahead of time. As you get bigger and you have lots of different vendors, you have to know what you're asking all of them, and you have to trust them to some degree. Is you say, what is your power draw? Like I have to give that all the time. Like I'll tell people I need, this is how many watts of power that I plan to be pulling. This is how many, do I need 100 amp single phase or 3 phases of 100 amps or do I need, I might ask for, in a smaller build, I might say, well, I need 20 or I need 5 20 amp Edisons, which Edison is just a standard wall plug. And that's a really small build. And so so you can talk to them about what you need, and then someone who's managing power has got to figure it out, add it all up, and then usually double or triple that number. and then that's what you, when you get in trouble is when people don't double or triple that number, because it just adds up. There's just a lot more people that you don't want to ever run out of headroom on a large scale power project, because putting more power in is super hard. Because, of everybody's up, so you have to turn everybody down to do that. So you don't want to you want to give yourself enormous amounts of headroom when it comes to power. Go ahead, Jesse.
So if it's a high profile job, you definitely want to have an electrical engineer do the load calculation. That's what they do. And they would know what the panel can support. So you can work back from that if you have to.
But it's definitely something that you want tons of overage, and where we've gotten into trouble is where people went, well, I can use 90% of that, and then there's more that's needed, and then you run out of headroom. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've had trouble because the peak draw when you're starting up a system is usually the biggest draw. I've seen systems that would run, but if they crashed, they couldn't get them rebooted because everything needed that peak draw and they weren't capable of doing that.
And we want the peak, for us, we want peak draw to hit 60% of what we're capable of. That's the max. 40% is what we're targeting, but no more than 60%. And that's the math that we put into it. When everything's coming up and all the fans are spinning and everything else is whizzing along, we want it to actually have a lot of headroom there. Next question.
Dave Kaufman has our last one on the regular list here. How does a producer know if we have enough to contribute to request to be a panelist? Interesting question.
The best way, well, so right now, the way you decide is you show up. You see how it works, and you see what it looks like. So the you know, that's been the thing, and what we have found almost to a person is that everybody has something to add. You know, like they have some specialty that they know, or some you know, individual thing that they have that adds to the panel, and so we haven't really found people missing very often. As we go into the next generation of this, probably Office Hours 3.0 sometime in the fall, we will probably start inviting all of the panelists for the weekdays, but the weekends will all be opened, you know, to you know, anybody who wants to jump in. So it'll be us trying to figure out who the next people are, but it won't be quite as open as it is right now. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's kind of like Jeopardy when, you know, you sit there at home and you're like, playing Jeopardy. Do you know the answer to it? And if you get enough of them, you're like, how would I respond? The other one that I heard from Roscoe was answer when you have one that feels like it was bowled right to you. You know, like if you can take it, if you know the answer, like inside and out, that's yours. But if you're kind of like, I don't know, unless nobody raises their hand, then I would pass. So,
you know, I think that the thing is that remember what about this panel is that all of us are a lot smarter than one of us, and it's not. It isn't a function. It feels like we all know all these answers, but one person knows this one answer and the other person knows this other answer. And that's the real power of why you want this larger panel than what we normally have, is because we don't have to guess. Like when the color questions came up, I don't have to guess, Charles, this is all Charles does. You know, now, does he answer audio questions? No, or sometimes, but not often. If we want to talk about, you know, audio questions, whether it, you know, you know, whether it's Jeff or Todd that are in here right now, there's IT questions that Jim can answer that we can't. There's, you know, YouTube questions that Jeffrey can answer. There's architectural questions that Jesse can answer. There's, you know, a variety of hardware, solutions that Guy can answer, and as we, you know, and you know, editing questions that Chris can answer. All of those things are things, and as I learn who answers what, then I know what to throw to. Like Richard is new, so I'm slowly learning what Richard can answer, and then over time we'll learn, like, okay, that's, you know, he's newish for us, you know, like, so he's like, I'm still learning what Richard knows, and with Kenn, I know that there's web stuff and there, you know, that he can do, and infrastructure stuff, as well as, you know, the audio and video that he's using. And so those are in all of these cases, you know, I'm learning also who knows what over time. And so I know who to throw it to, and I'm making decisions when 3 people raise their hand. I'm making decisions of first, second, third, based on how they answer questions to try to get to the right answer. Go ahead, Bill.
I also think that you have to remember that Office Hours is pretty much a contemporary and forward-looking show. We spend some time in the past, but if you stopped your engaged curiosity about your field, unless it's something like electrical engineering where the things are pretty consistent, that might make it more difficult for you to participate. Because one of the things I've been so impressed with, even across all the age ranges and experience ranges, everybody here is constantly curious and keeps learning about the newest technology, because we're often at that edge. People are asking us how to build things that are pretty brand new. And so if you're the kind of person who constantly is reading and engaged, you make probably a great fit for the Office Hours team, because that's who's around here.
It definitely is the most common thing that we see is curiosity. You know, and so I have a feeling that Office Hours over time, and the reason it's not Office Hours Media or something like that, is that, you know, we took on cooking. We got really into it. And so it was really fun. So there's a lot of places this could go over a long period of time, into areas of just people being curious. slowly, we just don't want to subdivide that or pull people in too many directions at one time. But whether it's, it could be a lot of different things around, but, general geekery, there's lots of things that you can be a geek about. And I think that a lot of us are. And that's the one thing we found really quickly is there's a lot of us that are really into cooking, and there's some of us that are into gardening. There's some of us into crafts, and some of us into, other things, and music and all these other places. And so there's a lot of places that this can go over time. We just have to get to the right maturity before we do it. And so we're figuring out how to do that little net nucleus of how to make it work and how to make it work amongst all of us. And because we started media, we can, we have this incredible ability to, when we go to cooking, it's the best cooking show ever, because we have all these cameras and all this stuff, and we know how to interact, and we know how to, we already have that culture. And so we can add, office hours magic to a lot of different things. But we'll do that very slowly. As we go through that. Of the cooking was part of that experiment. The Raspberry Pi experiment is another piece of that, where, hey, we can all get together and build things together, and we can do, so there's a lot of things that we could do like that. So there's a lot of places this can go. Anyway, this is the end of our little experiment. So I'm going to tell Kevin Maurer that he can close this up as needed, and we're going to close this. It takes a minute. This is a little different for all of us, is that I don't jump right into the post show, because Kevin has to fade me out and then fade to black and fade it out, and then I have to see it inside the YouTube and then close it all up, and then we start. And as soon as I get to that point is when we'll jump to the post show. So I'm talking through this and just looking at YouTube in the corner of my eye, waiting for it to go to the fade. And this is the stretch. This is the stretch that we do here. And so thanks to everybody who's watching. And I'm just going to sit here and just hope that it changes sometime soon. I'm also behind in YouTube, so I don't see it. That's part of the problem, is that I don't see the live either. So all I can see is what Kevin's done 20 seconds behind. And see now that Kevin, from my view, has switched to the panel there. But we don't have anything. We haven't gone to the gray screen or to the black screen.